Hi everybody, today is Tuesday, September 15. I was having a conversation with somebody the other night and they said to me something that I've heard quite a bit over the last 5 months or so. And that is something to the effect of, I feel like this whole COVID time period is going to result in a big negative fallout for people's mental health. There's something about being kept to yourself more than you usually are, that you can't hide from yourself. So if you're not well, you're just stuck in that place. Now, I know that we're starting to come out of it a little bit, although the news is kind of two-sided about whether we should be hopeful or not for the coming weeks. But the fact is, when we are in a place that is sort of in a negative cycle of thought within ourselves, it's hard to get out of that. And if we're in a place where it's hard for us to be optimistic about the future, the question is, where do we find our hope then? See, there's a difference between optimism and hope. I saw a writer say this recently, that optimism is having a good feeling about the future because present circumstances point to that good outcome. If you're playing a basketball game, for example, and you're 20 points ahead with 2 minutes left on the clock, you can be optimistic that you're going to win. You think something good is going to happen because present circumstances indicate that. So that's optimism. But sometimes we need hope when we can't be optimistic. We need hope when present circumstances don't point to a positive outcome. And the question is, where do we find hope when it's hard to be optimistic? Where do we find hope when we're in a negative cycle of thought? Where do we find hope when we're stuck with ourselves and we can't get our mind out of that downward spiral? Well, that's a question that the psalmist takes on in Psalm 77. This is one of my favorite psalms. This comes across almost as a Shakespearean soliloquy. I can imagine a figure like Hamlet taking center stage and unpacking his thoughts in a way like Psalm 77. The psalmist is so raw in trying to figure out, I'm in a place of hopelessness. Nothing looks good to me right now. So where should I look? Which direction should I look? Let's pay attention to what the psalmist comes up with. I cried out to God for help. I cried out to God to hear me. When I was in distress, I sought the Lord. At night, I stretched out untiring hands, and I would not be comforted. Here's somebody who feels very alone. I remembered you, God, and I groaned. I meditated, my spirit grew faint. You kept my eyes from closing. This person can't even sleep. I was too troubled to speak. I thought about the former days and the years of long ago. I remembered my songs in the night. My heart meditated, and my spirit asked. Listen to what questions this person asks. Will the Lord reject forever? Will he never show his favor again? Has his unfailing love vanished forever? Has his promise failed for all time? Has he forgotten to be merciful? Has he in anger withheld his compassion? Can you think of more raw and honest questions for a person of faith to be asking about God? Listen to those questions again. Listen to how alone, isolated, and completely without God the psalm writer feels here. Will the Lord reject forever? Will he never show his favor again? Has his unfailing love vanished forever? Has his promise failed for all time? Has God forgotten to be merciful? Has he in anger withheld his compassion? Here's somebody who feels totally isolated from God and is wondering, has God forgotten me? This is somebody, I think it's safe to say, who's looking at his present life circumstances and saying, I cannot be optimistic. I just don't see things lining up for a positive outcome for me right now. So where am I going to look for hope in my faith in God? Can I look anywhere? And here's what the psalmist suggests. He says, then I thought, this is where I'm going to look. To this I will appeal. This is what I'm going to turn to. The years when the Most High stretched out his right hand. I will remember the deeds of the Lord. Yes, I will remember your miracles of long ago. I will consider all your works and meditate on all your mighty deeds. So here's what the psalmist is telling us. When we look at our lives in the present, and there's nothing lining up for us to be optimistic about in the future, the place to look is not down at our own 2 feet and where we're standing. The place to look is back behind us at what God has done in the past. That hope does not come from the present circumstances like optimism does. Hope comes from knowing that God was faithful in the past and God will be faithful in the future. This is hope that transcends what things look like right now at this moment. When the psalmist thinks of this, it completely changes his outlook. He went from saying, I feel completely isolated to God, to saying, I'm going to think back on how God was faithful in the past and the things that God did. And then he starts to proclaim God's goodness. He says, your ways, God, are holy. What God is as great as our God? You are the God who performs miracles. You display your power among the people. With your mighty hand, you redeemed your people. You see the change that's happened when the psalmist stops looking at where his feet are planted today and looks back at God's faithfulness in the past. And that gives him hope in who God is and hope for the future. And we can do the same sorts of things. If we are stuck in a moment where we're feeling hopeless, where there's no reason for optimism because of present circumstances, maybe we feel the weight of our own mental health issues, maybe we feel anxiety about the future, maybe we feel under the dark cloud of a relationship problem. We can't look always at what's going on today to give us hope for tomorrow. But we can look at what God has done for us in the past to have hope about what God will do for us in the future. The Apostle Paul in Ephesians brings us to the absolute bedrock anchor place of hope when he talks about what God has done for his people. The Apostle Paul says, he chose us in Christ before the creation of the world to be holy and blameless in his sight. In love, he predestined us to adoption to sonship through Jesus Christ in accordance with his pleasure and will, to the praise of his glorious grace, which he has freely given us in the one he loves, Jesus Christ. In him we have redemption through his blood, the forgiveness of sins, in accordance with the riches of God's grace that he lavished on us with all wisdom and understanding. The Apostle Paul brings us back to, he brings our story back to before the foundation of the earth. Whatever problems we're facing are temporal. God's love goes to before the foundations of the earth itself. Paul says God chose his people in Christ before the foundations of the earth to be holy and blameless in his sight. That's how far back God's love and God's actions on behalf of his people go. And God will not let his people down in the future. So when we are looking for hope, when we can't be optimistic, the answer is to take a cue from the psalmist, to look back at God's actions, and to know and to have faith that God is the same yesterday, today, and forever, and we can put our hope in him. I hope you have a great week, and we will see you again next time.